Charles Bediako, yes, that Charles Bediako is going to come back and play at Alabama? Should Houston get in on this trend? No.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen of the day. Please make your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Coogs, making Locked On Sports Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network in the world. If you're in the conversation and you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below what kind of writing. Are you a blue pen guy? Are you a black pen? Are you more of a pencil? A little, maybe a little more flair action in your game. What do you got going on when you're writing things down, jotting notes down these days? Today's show is brought to you by everybody's over at FanDuel. You got all kinds of ways to get into the action this playoff season, but more on that fun later. I got to talk to you about this Charles Bediako deal at Alabama and why I don't think this is good for college basketball, and I don't think Houston A, will, or B, should follow suit. I want to talk to some about the Caleb Holt news. There's some more updates in his recruiting after the Hoops Hall events over the long weekend, and kind of some updates got pushed out throughout the day Tuesday, kind of where things stand, it looks like, with Caleb Holt potentially being a Houston Cougar. And I want to talk some about the upcoming Houston Cougar basketball game against Texas Tech and how that kind of may shape the Big 12 race in a lot of ways. So we got lots to get into today, but I want to start with Charles Bediako. Yes, that Charles Bediako of Alabama fame. Now, if you don't remember Charles Bediako, you're probably not alone, but I'll bring this back to Houston in a second, I promise. Charles Bediako was a big man, like a traditional 6'11". Let me make sure I'm not wrong here. On his height, it might have been a 7-footer, but he was that kind of big man. Yes, right here. So they got him down at 6'11", and that one hadn't done so well, he was really, really strong, really big, long wingspan. So whatever he was, it was positive wingspan. And he played against Houston actually, and a couple times Houston played Alabama, if you remember back in 2022. And anyway, he was involved in that game. Just 2021 and 2022 because they played in December of those years. Bediako was there from 2021 to 2023. He ultimately opted to go into the NBA draft after a sophomore year and did not get drafted. I should stress that he was a 4-star prospect, was a high-end guy. He opted to try and go in the NBA draft. Might not have got great advice. And he has played in 46 G League games since then and signed 3 different, air quotes, NBA contracts. He's signed 2 different Exhibit 10 deals and 1 Exhibit 10 that turned into a 2-way contract with NBA rosters. I believe mostly with the Spurs organization. But the Exhibit 10 deals just means that really, like, you're on their short list of guys to pull up if they need a roster spot filled. So Bediako has, that extent of an NBA career. And Darren Heitner, I believe, is his attorney, and I don't want to speak out of turn. I think Heitner does a pretty good job of being transparent on social media. If you follow him, he's a very, very much actively involved in changing the NCAA attorney every one of these cases, right? So, like, it's not surprising he's involved. But Bediako is suing the NCAA, saying he should be able to return to Alabama and use his final 2 years of eligibility. And I have to say that's freaking ridiculous. He's just under 24 years old. He's attempted to be drafted, did not get drafted. And I think that the real way they're going to go about this is they're going to look at other guys that have recently, including like Baylor's James Najee, who was drafted in the NBA but has opted to go back to college. They're going to look at that as kind of some sort of a precedent. Like, okay, well, this Exhibit 10 deal is not quite the same thing as a true NBA contract. A 2-way contract is not the same thing, or they're going to try and find different ways to work around that. And going to attempt to, because he has not played an NBA game, they're going to attempt to get Bediako into college basketball that way and avoid those Exhibit 10 deals and stuff like that by pointing out like other guys that have been drafted have returned to college. Why can't this guy who once played in college return to college? And there's some legal soundness there. I at a surface level. This is all speaking at a very macro level. We don't have a whole lot of court case documents. We have a lot of newspaper reporting in front of us. Those are very different things. But I want to stress that Houston A should not get into this game, and B I don't think will. I think that they're recruiting those guys that have no college experience, right, to come in and develop and work with and train and whatever. They were in on the Abdullah guy that's at BYU now. They were recruiting him and thought they had a pretty good shot at him, right? That I don't want to act like Houston's immune to any of that game, but this is the equivalent of like I don't know, going and bringing Armani Brooks back, and actually he's a little bit older than this, I guess, but I don't know that that's the right way for things to go if you're Houston. Um, I I really think once you opt to leave college basketball, that's different than having never tried college basketball. And I don't mean to make this gigantic demarcation. I think you need to make one somewhere though. And if that's the demarcation, that's what it is. And Bediako is going to try and push this. Now, what's also going to happen is that there's going to be a bunch of cases at the NCAA doorstep, and they're not going to deal with this. They're going to write it off, say, dismiss it, whatever. And he'll probably end up getting to play, much like Najee got to play, much like other guys, Abdullah, etc., have all gotten to play. If I sound like horrible, I'm sorry. I am still working through whatever that was, hence having less episodes this week. But I do. I don't know. There's part of me that feels like, okay, how do you protect kids from getting bad advice? Do we need to more professionalize or regulate where the advice comes from or whatever? How would you standardize that across 300 something schools in college basketball? But I also just feel like, at Alabama, this guy had every resource under the sun to figure out what his draft status was going to be. And he made a bad decision, and now he's, got to go figure that out. I'm not saying he can't go back and get a degree. That's a very different proposition. You can get get that a number of different ways while you're working as a G League player or a European player or whatever. This Bediako thing is fascinating in that it feels like between the strength of the Heitner and his firm and those kinds of things and the high profile case it is because it's an SEC school and a guy that was playing there. And like Bediako was an all SEC defense caliber player while he was at Alabama. Like this is not some guy that was coming off the bench, right? Like he was very recently, like in 2023, 3 years ago, a guy that was one of the best defensive players in that entire conference. And I do think that that's not great for college basketball. I don't know why in my head I had this line of demarcation where people have played college basketball before going pro versus the guys that never tried college basketball like James Najee. But I do think that there is one there. And I understand Houston is very much dancing, has tried to dance on one side of that line. And I understand there's going to be a hypocrite. There's going to be someone in my comment section tell me I'm a hypocrite for choosing one side of the line and not the other. I just, at some point, you can't keep pushing toothpaste out of the tube. I don't know. It's an interesting and weird one. Now, who I think Houston will be adding is a handful of high school kids. They've got 2 signed in the class of 2026 and another high-profile one potentially on the way. More news came out on that after the long weekend and the Hoops Hall Classic games. But before we get into any of that, today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at FanDuel. Because playoffs are here, FanDuel is giving customers more ways to get in on the action every day throughout the NFL playoffs. Look, all kinds of fun ways to get involved in the app on FanDuel. There's money lines, point spreads, everything, live betting, parlays as things are happening. You can get in on the action over at FanDuel. FanDuel is the best place to get on the action all playoff long. So visit FanDuel.com. Get your playoffs going today. Parker Angels locked on Coogs here. And a really, really talented class of 2025 has done Houston very well this year. I think a lot of people are asking, okay, like, well, what's next? How do you go up from the best class in school history? Houston's followed that up by signing five-star big man Arafan Diane, and Diane, and they also got Alozie, a high-end four-star, someplace some as a five-star point guard prospect, both in the class of 2026. But they're losing a lot more than two guys, right? And a guy on everyone's radar to replace some of those losses is Caleb Holt. Now, Caleb Holt is a five-star plus. No one's got him ranked lower than a five-star, 6'5" kind of wing. He's a kind of a shooting guard, kind of a small forward, definitely a scorer, big, long, strong, does what he wants with the ball, great defender. He's a one of those kind of prospects. He's very much a high school kid. He will make mistakes as a freshman. He's all those kinds of things, right? But he's got some grit and toughness to him that makes him feel like a Houston Cougar in a lot of ways. He's had Houston high on his list this entire time. And after the Hoops Hall Classic last weekend, where a lot of these EYBL scholastic teams got together and played and whatever. And Caleb Holt, should point out, plays at Prolific Prep. He's been playing in that circuit lately. Prolific Prep now in Florida, but they're playing now based in Florida. They're playing all these tournaments and things like that as well. And he broke down his recruitment with On3, and it's a behind a paywall article. I'm not going to give you all the juice and details behind it, but it does sound like things continue to trend to Houston. And so you start asking around about it. It sounds like consistent question. First of all, I should point out, it sounds like we're not going to have any decision from Holt until March or April. Basketball recruitments can take a lot longer than football ones, partially because the recruitment happens during their season. And some guys want to focus on like the task at hand, like winning a national championship in the EYBL Scholastic or whatever, right? And valid, all good reasons, right? I also think though that when you look at part of this too is in basketball, there's only 5 guys on the floor at a time, and you have the potential to go pro a year later. And so you want to make sure you're finding somewhere you can fit it on the floor if you're one of these high caliber prospects. We saw this Cole Pete last year. Cole Pete had Houston in his top handful of schools and really went down to the wire. Ultimately chose Arizona. I do feel like Houston felt pretty good about where they stood with Cole Pete, had some things fell down where they were, but also a key factor is Houston lost 2 starters. Arizona lost a lot more than that. There's a spot for him in Arizona in starting lineup in a different way. And I don't mean to say that's the only issue. He also stayed home. He's from Arizona, right, et cetera. Caleb Holt feels like the same kind of thing, though. He's also been looking at, okay, as a one and done prospect, where can I maximize while getting coached? I want to stress most of Caleb's options have strong coaching. And that seems to be an important thing to him. He wants to get coached hard. Houston's a great place to do that. I think that's one of the reasons this really works, right? But he is keeping an eye on which backcourts he'll get more run in or more action in, right? Look, Houston is going to be graduating Emmanuel Sharp, a long time, a long time starter. I was about to say long time, like 10th pole of the Houston Cougars, feels like. Milo Suzanne, starting point guard. And you're also going to be potentially losing Kingston Fleming to the NBA draft. We'll see where things go. I mean, he is projected, and some people have him as a top 10 pick right now. It would be hard to tell a guy to not go to the NBA draft. He's projected as a top 10 pick at any given point, right? That's the name of the game. That's really hard to do, right? So you lose those 3. You bring in Ikenna Alozie, who's a rough, tumble, gritty, defensive-minded point guard. Again, a high-end recruit who can. I don't mean to say he's got no offensive game. He actually showed up at the Hoops Hall as well for Dream City Christian. But he does have a lot more upside on the defense. He's a lot more developed, I should say, on the defensive side. He's an aggressive, physically dominant point guard. A little bit on the shorter side. He's closer to 6'2", right? But you've got Mercy Miller coming back. You've got Cordell Jefferson, Bryce Jackson. You've got Isaiah Harwell probably coming back, right? Like these guys all filling in spots. And so I wonder if Caleb continues to have Houston in his top five, which he has, and Caleb continues to talk about all these things that make him sound like a perfect Houston Cougar, like the wanting to be coached and all that kind of stuff. It sounds like their relationships are great. Sampson and Holtz get along very well. I'm sure other staffs and Holt get along very well too. He's a nice kid. I think that that's a very normal thing. I wonder though if ultimately this will come down to, as he's looking to sign in March or April, as Houston's winding their season down, hopefully in April. Well, okay, what's that Flemings guy gonna do? Well, okay, who else is playing in these guard spots? And I know that that's kind of a drag to a lot of fans. I think that that's, you know, you want to just have all the best players show up and compete for it, the best guys play that did it. But ultimately, like if you're Caleb Holt, you've got to whittle down to a handful of options, your Arizonas, Alabama, Houston, that have strong coaching. You're going to get coached, and you're trying to find a place to play for a year, get coached, develop. And he's got the kind of guy that's got the projection to maybe be a pro the very next year. Now, I do think it's worth pointing out, like Arizona's already signed a 6'6" scoring wing. Alabama is really high and may very soon sign Brandon McCoy, a 6'4", 6'5" scoring wing. So as we get closer to March and April, spots may fill up other places too, right? So how this thing unfolds will be fascinating to watch. He's a high-end recruit that is very much on Houston's radar, and I think they feel pretty good about their relationship with. But it's got to be a two-way street, right? Guys got to see what they want in you as well, not just like you, and that's part of it. Now, I think there's also a lot of fervor around some high-end 2027 prospects because two of them are in Houston, right? And Santos and Alston both being two of the best kids in the country and that are in Houston's backyard, I think make everyone really excited about that class, 2027, 2027, 2027. And I don't mean to say that we're going to kick the can down the road to that very soon, although those guys are really talented and do warrant being excited about, right? But I do think that as you look at this, um, you're probably looking at a very small 2026 high school class. You've got the two in Diane and Alozie. I imagine you see them pull in a third that is someone they can develop. Think about what Cordell was 2 years ago, Bryce Jackson was last year. These guys that are from Texas, maybe from Houston, that can pull and keep under, that are going to work their butt off every day and kind of develop into something by their later years of college. Whether it's like Bryce, who missed some time hurt in high school, or Cordell had those wrist injuries when he showed up, you're kind of putting it, almost stowing one away, right? That kind of a development project. So keep an eye on one of those happening. But I also wonder if after that it's like, okay, it's either Holt or we go at the portal. Because you've got really high hopes for some stuff in 2027. You feel really good about the guys you got so far, the two you got in 2026. You feel really good about bringing back Harwell and Mercy, these other guys in the backcourt and off your current roster. Do you go get someone to just kind of bridge the gap? You go find, like you did Miles Uzan for 2 years. Do you go find, like you did LJ Cryer for 2 years, Khalifa Sacco off the bench, maybe to play behind one of these guys? You go find someone like that to kind of pull your class together. I have gone a long way around this to say I weirdly feel like even if Holt comes, but certainly if Holt does not come, you're looking at a larger portal class than normal for Houston in 2026 because they've got the high end 2027s, because they've got a couple guys that may go pro and make the Exodus feel bigger in 2025. I wonder if because of that imbalance, you may have more portaling on the basketball side of things than normal, which makes that portal window being after the national championship game, that window becomes really, really important really, really quickly for Coug fans. And so keep an eye on that. Holt's recruitment is going to be interesting. It could be a roller coaster. So ride that whole thing out. But I want to talk about the guys on the team present. We talked about guys that I don't think will ever be on the team, guys that may end up on the team. And in the third segment, I'm talking about the guys that are presently on the team and what they're doing this weekend. But first, welcome back to Locked On Coogs. Host Parker Ainsworth here. And this weekend, college game day is going. Houston, Texas Tech in Lubbock, Saturday night. Epic, epic, epic. Texas Tech was the last Big 12 team to beat Houston. Houston also beat Texas Tech in Lubbock last year. This is a really, really fun rivalry for a lot of reasons. Part of me wonders if this is weirdly already for a shot at the Big 12. And I say that because if Houston wins both games against Texas Tech, the home and the road game against Texas Tech, that puts them firmly in the driver's seat against Tech. They play BYU once, they play Arizona once. You could split those and have against that top group of they play Iowa State once against that top four teams, other teams in the conference. If you could maybe get B3-2, that might be good enough to win. And if you were to go 4-1 amongst that top five, then suddenly you're the best team in the conference. Getting a second win against Tech would go so far in doing that for Houston. I don't mean to overemphasize a game in January. And I know the Samsons are very level-headed about this, but we're fans, fanatics, right? That's part of the deal here. And I think that if you look at this game as a symbol of that, or of you can get a couple of those five you got to have, right? Because look, I would love to beat Iowa State, beat Arizona, beat BYU, beat Tech both times, go 5-0 in that stretch. That'd be phenomenal. That'd be unreal. It's also just not realistic. This conference is that difficult. This conference is that complicated, right? For what it's worth, KenPom has 4 predicted losses for Houston. They're predicting a loss this weekend in Lubbock. They're predicting a loss at BYU, at Iowa State, and at Kansas. That's 4 road losses. Now, we also know Houston hasn't lost a game on the road since 2024, a true road game since 2024, right? And so there's other factors at play than the analytical models that KenPom is running. I do think, though, that if Houston were to only lose those 4 games at 14-4, that's going to be up there competing to win the conference. 15-3 probably does it. Now, if they can manage to, somehow go 3-2 amongst those top groups, whatever, 16-2 wins the conference. And no one wants to predict any losses. We're going to talk ourselves into win every game we play. And there are ways Houston could win every game they play. There's not a talent gap in this conference where they just can't win a game. Then that's just not going to happen, right? But if Houston can pull off this win against Tech, that will kind of separate them some from the pack. Yes, Arizona is undefeated in conference. They played a tricky one against Cincinnati on Wednesday night, which I'm keeping an eye on. Cincinnati played Houston close. Cincinnati had a big win last week as well. And I keep an eye on what Cincinnati is doing. BYU has a lot of talent. I also think BYU is fairly beatable at when you watch them play, but a lot of talent. They've lost to Tech for what it's worth, right? BYU did. Iowa State, I know, plays a really hard to play kind of basketball, but I also have seen I've seen Houston grind that one out too. So there's none of these games that I'm worried about Houston never having a chance to win. What I think is the bigger task is you've got a chance this weekend. Let's say Cincinnati beats Arizona. Probably not, but maybe. Right? Let's say, I don't know, BYU drops they have a layup against Utah this weekend. Let's say that's a rivalry game. Rivalry game, things happen, chaos breaks out, right? Suddenly, you're at the top. Moreover, it really puts a gap between you and Tech at the top of this conference because Tech will, I think, consistently compete to be at the top of this conference throughout the rest of the year, right? I think Christian Anderson's a pro. JT Toppin's really good. Um, returning Big 12 Player of the Year, right? Like all that kind of thing. But Castle's a heck of a coach. Credit where it's all due. I do think that you'll see interesting matchup stuff. We'll get through this throughout the week this week. Nice thing about having a weekday games. We can kind of preview this game all week as we get towards Saturday. I do think you'll see Houston kind of pick up on some matchup things. I think you've seen Houston shut down a handful of great scoring guards in the last month, and that's not an accident. That's something they're doing very well. And so I imagine they'll have more for Christian. Now, Christian Anderson's seen it one time, so the chess match becomes what Houston does back and forth, right? They ran him off the 3-point line, ran him into help, and kind of double teamed him in the tree, so to speak. Once he got down there, made them beat him with his assists, and he had a lot of assists. What does Tech do to respond to that in this game? And then how does Houston respond to that response will be a way this plays out. But the top of this conference is so strong that when you've got a chance to get a second win over someone like Tech, especially when Houston doesn't have a lot of those. Houston's home and homes are not with Arizona and BYU and Iowa State, right? They're with Tech and Baylor and Cincy, and that's a little different. And so you got to make sure you take advantage of them when they pop up. Now, I don't know why Ken Palmer currently still thinks Houston loses at Kansas. Kansas is a tough place to play, and if the Peterson guy is playing, they're very good. I just can't get a read on them with or without him, and or I can't get a read on whether or not they have him, I should say, and then if they don't have him, where some of their scoring comes from. But that's all to say, Houston this weekend with Tech can start to separate themselves a little bit from the pack in a way that I think is going to be interesting to see unfold. Now, as more does unfold this week, we're going to be previewing this game a couple times. We'll also be live afterwards on Saturday. I can't wait to talk to you about it in the subtext group, in the everyday or all access chat as well. So if you're new to Locked On, you want to check us out over at lockedonpodcast.com/everyday for more content every single day. Make sure you check that out as well. Locked On Coogs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every single day. Go Coogs.